Hey, Witch Mob! Welcome to the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast. Secret Garden is a 5-star vegan and vegetarian restaurant where you can have an incredible chef-to-table experience for breakfast, lunch or dinner. Our chef is an expert in food allergies and intolerances and can cater to any dietary need from gluten, sugar or dairy-free to creating a low FODMAPs menu or catering to any other dietary requirements you have. Stop by Secret Garden for an amazing meal or order online and pick up anytime. Grab a dessert or an ice cream while you're there. Groups are welcome with a reservation and you can discuss a custom-made menu for your event with the chef. Secret Garden has an extensive menu with excellent prices and you won't be disappointed. Mention the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast for a complimentary drink. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me this week. Don't forget to share with your friends and follow on Spotify. This week we've got a story about a scam. So most of us while travelling have been confronted by some kind of scam. Some of us fall for it and some of us don't. I guess it depends on the skills of the scammer. I've seen a few scams in several decades of travelling, and I have to say I can usually spot a scam from a mile away. In Istanbul, the shoe shiners would drop their brush in front of you, then pretend to be super grateful if you picked it up for them. They'd offer you a free shine, and then halfway through, when one shoe was shiny but the other one was not, they'd ask for a tip. And guess what would happen if you didn't give them the tip? In Ecuador, I saw a group of boys who had dug a hole in the sand at the beach at the end of the street, and anyone dumb enough to try to drive on the beach would get bogged in the hole. Then, the boys would run to the rescue and negotiate with the driver to get the car out of the hole. They'd get it out, then they'd get paid. Then after the driver drove away, grateful he'd been pulled out of the hole, they'd cover up the hole and wait for the next moron who wanted to drive on the beach. In Romania, there used to be a phone card scam. Someone would ask to borrow your card to make one call in a public phone box and then switch it out for an expired card. Scammers are creative and resourceful, and once the jig is up, they come up with another way to part a fool from their money. India is no exception. There's a scammer on every corner. Sometimes it's not even that much money, but it's the indignity of being scammed that stings. And if they got away with it one time with me, they'll try it again with you. So let's go investigate this Indian scam and see how we all feel about it. This story takes place in India and it's called Monsoon Season. In the early 1990s, when I was in India, the verdant city of Udaipur could be best described as a bubbling oasis in the desert. It's probably changed by now, but back then it was arguably one of the most romantic cities in Rajasthan. Lake Pichola, Lake Fateh Sagar, and Lake Uday Sagar had given Udaipur its well-earned reputation as the idyllic city of lakes. Intricate marble palaces, beautifully laid out gardens, and shimmering clear blue lakes made Udaipur seem like a mirage set in the middle of the harsh terrain of the hills and ravines of Aravalis. Cool breezes blew through the streets of Udaipur, exhaling the nostalgic mood of a bygone era. My travelling friend Janine and I ambled around historical sites and bazaars, falling in love with the city over and over again. Each time we rounded a corner, there was another source of fascination, be it food, architecture, history, music, or dance. Of all the Indian cities we visited, Udaipur was by far our favourite. We stayed in a room we lovingly called the penthouse suite at the Miwa Inn. Perched on a rocky outcrop at the edge of the city centre, the hotel was popular with backpackers. The rooftop room was a large airy space, roughly constructed on top of a row of smaller rooms, complete with 4 wiry, squeaky beds as the only furniture. There were no curtains, no rugs on the floor, no embellishments. It was as basic as a hostel room could get. The communal bathroom was downstairs. On all 4 sides, we were treated to lovely vistas of our lush surroundings. Never fussy about accommodation, we settled in quickly. It was here I subsequently contracted malaria, but one can hardly blame a room for that. Anyway, that's another story. Actually, you can check out the podcast episode called Are You Sure It's Just a Cold? To find out about that story. Our roommates, Nigel and Arvel, were a distinctly mismatched but friendly pair. Rambunctious Nigel quickly set about proving how loudly he could fart at will, while introverted Arvel openly winced in shame. Nigel spoke in a loud, abrupt Cockney accent, while Arvel's was strictly posh London. They were like a cross between Mr. Dorkeronimus and Dr. Spock. Janine and I frequently exchanged looks at Nigel's unpredictable antics and silently conceded we'd probably survive the ordeal without becoming scarred for life. Up until his arrival, we'd already suffered much worse. Actually, true to the books and covers dictum, the odd couple turned out to be a lot of fun, and we enjoyed each other's company. We became fast friends, although no one ever figured out Nigel's joke about wombats. Nige was definitely a bit of a Nige, as we say in Australia. A few days passed pleasantly touring the city together as we became acquainted with our newfound friends. One day we hired battered and rusty bicycles to cruise around the streets and almost ended up battered and rusty ourselves. Riding in traffic was death-defyingly hair-raising. Our Indianology lesson that day was, don't cycle in India if you don't have a death wish. On foot, we explored the nooks and crannies of the city palace and got lost in the maze of halls and rooms. We snapped silly pictures of each other stewing inside the enormous copper cooking pots at the museum and oohed and ahed at the gorgeous 1922 Rolls-Royce in mint condition that was stashed in a hidden courtyard at the back of the palace. We wandered around the immense city park and managed to get lost. A few days later, we decided to take the much-touted sunset tour of the famous Monsoon Palace, known locally as Sarjangarh. The Monsoon Palace hangs precariously, like a fairy tale castle, from a jagged mountain located just outside the city. Udaipur was best known as the site of the lake palace used in the egregious 1983 James Bond film, Octopussy. The derelict palace played the role of villain Kamal Khan's heavily guarded home and the base of his evil empire, where James Bond ended up locked in the cold room. Meanwhile, a surprise attack by circus performers made for some interesting viewing. Other sequences shot at the palace include a tiger hunt while riding elephants, where James Bond escapes and was pursued into the jungle, and the finale, an action-packed battle in the courtyard, and an escape via a Union Jack hot air balloon. While the rest of the world quickly forgot about it, the film was truly ubiquitous in Udaipur. Just before sunset, thousands of rickshawwallas across the city gathered outside hotels to convince tourists to hire them for the sunset tour of the Monsoon Palace. Word on the traveller's street was that the crumbling palace wasn't much to look at, but the panoramic views overlooking the city and surrounding landscape were well worth the cost of the ride up the mountain. As we wandered down the street, we were promised a magnificent overview of the city's lakes, palaces, and surrounding countryside. At least a dozen wallahs pleaded for our business. Janine and I teamed up with Nigel and Arvel and hired a rickshaw to take us up to the magical sunset and fabulous views from the Monsoon Palace. We agreed on 100 rupees for the return trip to the palace and at least 1 hour on the peak. Back in the early 90s, that was more than a day's wages. Everyone was satisfied with our arrangement, and we began our excursion immediately. 5 minutes later, at the beginning of the winding mountain road, the loudly chugging auto rickshaw ground to a rumbling halt. It seemed regular maintenance of the struggling engine had been neglected. There was a much heated discussion between the boys and the rickshawwallah. In the end, Janine and Arvel got out and started walking. Nigel and I continued the slow ascent in a much lighter, but still huffing and puffing rickshaw. Riding upwards through the arid, scrubby Aravalli hills towards the Monsoon Palace, the landscape was reminiscent of a jagged mountain range in Western Australia. I gratefully breathed in the desert air, perfumed with wildflowers, and marvelled at the rugged terrain. The rickshaw negotiated steep twists and turns at a sick snail's pace. Halfway up the mountain, the motor finally gave up the ghost. Nigel and I got out and began to walk the rest of the way. Suddenly, the motor started again. The wallah left us in a black cloud of exhaust fumes and went on his way. The empty rickshaw had no trouble making it to the top, sans paying passengers. As Nigel and I plodded along the road, chatting and being funny, Janine and Arvel caught up. At the speed our decrepit and neglected transport had been going, they were never too far behind us. We gradually trudged up the bitumen road, loudly cursing whomsoever had come up with the ridiculous idea of going up a mountain for sunset. The beauty of the ravines and valleys faded into oblivion as we ran out of breath. Green fields began to resemble pillows we wished we could rest our weary heads upon. Our legs turned to rubber each time we went around a bend and discovered we weren't there yet. Even though we knew we would laugh about this one day, the comedy of the situation still lurked around a future corner. We stopped to rest often on the sides of the steep, curvy road. Just before we reached the Bansdara Peak, a monkey leapt across the road and disappeared up a tree. We peered into the forest. There were hundreds of monkeys quite close by, playing in the treetops and dancing around each other. We observed monkeys swinging between the trees. One couple vigorously hugged, and young monkeys happily leapfrogged over their elders. Older monkeys picked nits off their offspring, and males sat watching over the brood. Grateful for another excuse to stop, we took a long break to watch for a while before we continued our arduous climb to the base of the palace. In the car park at the top of the mountain, we found our rickshawwala relaxed and smiling. He was having a cigarette and a friendly chat with his mates. We weren't amused. Such a bunch of intrepid idiots we were, we had been conned. As we approached the foundations of the fragile white building, it seemed as if a strong gust of wind might send the palace crashing down the mountainside any time. At the top, we ignored the supposed gatekeeper's demand for rupees. Money, money, entrance money. Tickets, tickets, we queried in unison. In India, we had quickly learned never to hand money over to anyone at the entrance to a historical site unless they could provide a reasonable facsimile of a ticket. This guy was here to try his luck. The only tickets he had were on himself. We briskly marched past the indignant gatekeeper and climbed up to the castle. The once majestic marble edifice, perilously perched about 1,000 feet above Lake Piccola, had been abandoned and derelict for many years, and was officially closed to tourists. Janine's guidebook also claimed the palace was closed to the public, confirmed by the thick bolts secured to the rusty gates. However, we were quietly informed that a small baksheesh in the right hands could easily remove this obstacle. Curious to see inside, we discreetly placed a few folded rupees into the palm of the guard leaning against the door. He looked furtively around and let us, and another small group, into a darkened room. The eerily empty castle was inhabited by countless bird and wasp nests. We explored each room, imagining the glittering splendour it had held during the Maharana Sajin Singh's reign in the 19th century. As the sun began to set, we walked around in what must have once been one of the palace's grand ballrooms, with its marble pillars carved with motifs of leaves and flowers. Leaning out the arched windows, the incredible vista of rugged mountains rose to meet us. We scrambled up to the roof and wandered around freely between the rooms and their balconies. The glorious red-orange sunset was stunning. Udaipur and its lush green valley spread out below. The lakes shimmered in the fading sunlight. Jagged mountain ranges danced around us. Metal roofs winked on the horizon. We were enchanted. After the last traces of the setting sun dipped below the horizon, we returned to the place we had last seen our grinning, smoking rickshawwala, motorman. Sunset tour over, we planned to go into town and have dinner somewhere nice. Feeling glamorous after our private tour, we decided to treat ourselves. Assured the rickshaw would be able to descend, its passengers sitting inside the vehicle, we climbed in and set off down the winding road. We felt good about the spectacular sights we had witnessed and chatted about our experiences as a group. After about 5 minutes, Nigel noticed the driver hadn't yet turned on the engine. In fact, he never did. Our whole trip down the steep, twisting road could be attributed entirely to the natural consequence of gravity. As we neared the base of the mountain, a discussion took place. Fortunately for us, our conniving rickshawwala didn't speak English fluently. Whispering between ourselves, We unanimously agreed we were none too impressed with his performance. Some compromise of the terms would have to be undertaken. I volunteered. When it came to negotiation and bargaining, I had become a self-described expert during my time in Asia. The key in the ignition was finally turned as we approached the last corner at the bottom of the road. It was less than a 5-minute drive back to our hostel. As agreed, when we arrived in front of the hostel, Janine, Nigel and Arvin disappeared. They had vanished from the street before Motorman turned off the rickshaw. I slowly climbed out of the back of the vehicle and turned to face the skinny man sitting in his seat. "I will give you 40 rupees, I told him. "We agreed on 100, he said. "No, we agreed that you would take us up the mountain all the way to the top and then bring us down again. We walked all the way up and you didn't even turn the motor on to come down. You thought you were pretty clever, didn't you? 100 rupees, he demanded. "I'll give you 40, I said. He climbed out of his seat and made a threatening gesture. I moved back half a step and stood in a boxing pose, bracing myself to wallop him if he came any closer. He wouldn't be the first silly waller to land flat on his backside after I bopped him. He lowered his arms and I relaxed. 100 rupees, he shouted at the top of his voice. No, you can have 40 or nothing. You decide. I was hungry and wanted to join my friends. 100 rupees. Fine, I said, and started walking away. He grabbed my wrist and pulled on my arm. At first, I fought against him, but then let go. The force of him yanking my arm and my letting it go knocked him to the ground. He became enraged. I walked away before he had time to get up. The following morning, Motorman was waiting outside the hostel for us. 100 rupees, he yelled as we passed by. 40, Nigel shouted back. He tried to follow us, but Nigel flexed his muscles and squared his jaw. To be honest, if Indian men were slightly larger in build, Nigel's muscles wouldn't have been the least bit impressive, much less frightening. He was wiry and looked mean. That was enough for us. Our precocious little conman didn't give up, though. He sat outside the hostel every day for 4 days. Each day we played the same game. Eventually, we got bored and upped the ante. 100 rupees, he shouted the next morning. 30, cried Arvel. 100 rupees, he spat at us the following day. 20, Janine spat back. 100 rupees, he yelled at us. 10, we yelled simultaneously. 100 rupees. Sorry, mate, the expiry date is up, Nigel growled as if he meant it. He did. Motorman didn't come back the next day. We guessed he must have been getting his sadly neglected rickshaw serviced, so he could take paying tourists all the way up the mountain to watch the brilliant sunset at the magnificent Monsoon Palace. I feel like the very least you can expect from any type of transport service that you're paying for is to be transported to your destination. It's not that big of an ask, is it? So when this guy decided to make his passengers walk up a hill instead of taking us to our destination, we all felt scammed. Seriously, if I wanted to go to boot camp and run up mountains, I'd sign up for that. Sure, it was a nice walk, despite being a steep uphill climb, and we were all out of breath when we got there. But we had a reasonable expectation that was absolutely not met. Let's assume the rickshawwala also had expectations. He was anticipating a payday despite not doing what he was paid to do. In the end, we all ended up disappointed. Apart from that rickshawwalla's scam, the best thing about that day was actually seeing the palace and its gorgeous views and hanging out with that hilarious group of lunatics. Join me next week when we head to Turkey, where we'll come face to face with some Kurdish gun runners.
Hey there, love bugs! Welcome to the jungle! I'm Nancy Miarelli, your guide to the ecological and entomological, i.e. bug, wonders of Ecuador. With my master's in entomology and a passion for ecology and conservation, I'm here to take you on an unforgettable adventure through the mega diverse forests and more lush than you may have expected mountainsides of Ecuador. This year, I'm excited to offer 2 unique science-focused tours. Join me for a nature journaling course where we'll sit in the grass, sketch, observe, and reflect on all the creatures and plants that we discovered. Or dive deep into evolutionary theory on my evolution tour, where you'll see what you learned in a book that one time growing on the side of a tree. Ready to embark on a journey of discovery? Visit www.scibugs.info, that is Scibugs, SCIBUGS, to learn more or find me, Scibugs, everywhere on the internet. Let's explore Ecuador and all it has to offer together.
Do you have any crazy travel stories? What's the most insane thing that happened to you while you were on the road? If you'd like to share, send an MP3 recording of your story or write it into an email and send it to thewitchmob@gmail.com, and it could feature in a future episode. The Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast is created, written, read, produced, edited, mixed and published by BooksByRoni. If you'd like to grab a copy of Few Are Ooh, Travel Tales I Never Told Mom, find the paperback on Amazon or email thewitchpod@gmail.com to get an ebook. Also, let us know via email or on Blue Sky at The Witch Pod if you're reading in a book club or a group of friends so we can give you a shout out. Don't forget to tell us where you are in the world. You can visit The Witch Pod on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music and Castbox, and also Substack and Patreon. See you next week.
Bye!